You really think kindness gets you anywhere, Lisa? Wake up. The world doesn't care about people like you. The words echoed in her mind as she walked home, her hands still cold from giving away her last few dollars. Lisa, a single mother, had spent years balancing bills, work, and the needs of her child, always choosing generosity over security. Tonight, as she unlocked her door, an envelope lay on the floor. Its contents would change everything. Life was about to turn in the most suspenseful way. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Narrative Whispers. Today I am going to tell you another heartwarming story. So, let's dive into it. Lisa Matthews stared at the beautifully wrapped gift in her daughter's small hands, a knot forming in her stomach. The Matthews family living room, modest but warm with its faded furniture and handmade decorations, fell silent as 10-year-old Sophie carefully untied the elegant gold ribbon. Lisa exchanged a nervous glance with her husband David, who stood leaning against the doorframe, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes watchful. They both knew what Charles and Evelyn Blackwood, Lisa's wealthy parents, were capable of, having witnessed years of subtle slights and barely concealed disappointment. Still, Lisa hoped that today, on Thanksgiving, her parents might finally show some genuine affection toward their granddaughter. Sophie's face transformed from excitement to confusion as she opened the box. "It's empty," she said softly, turning the elegant white box upside down as if something might magically appear. The silence in the room deepened, uncomfortable and heavy. Charles Blackwood cleared his throat and adjusted his expensive watch, while his wife Evelyn's lips tightened into a thin line, her perfectly manicured hand reaching for her champagne glass. Neither made any attempt to explain the empty box, as if the mistake, if it even was a mistake, was too insignificant to acknowledge. "I'm sure there's some confusion," Lisa said quickly, the tremor in her voice betraying her anger. She had spent years making excuses for her parents' behavior toward Sophie and David, the forgotten birthdays, the backhanded compliments, the way they lavished attention and expensive gifts on her siblings' children while barely acknowledging Sophie's existence. David, a high school English teacher, had never been deemed good enough for the Blackwoods' golden daughter, and Sophie, by extension, seemed to inherit their disdain. Lisa felt David's hand on her shoulder, steady and reassuring, but she could sense the tension in his touch. "Perhaps the gift fell out," offered Rachel, Lisa's older sister, her voice artificially bright. Rachel had always been the peacemaker, the one who smoothed over family conflicts with platitudes and distractions. Her 3 children sat nearby, already surrounded by expensive toys and designer clothes from their grandparents, a stark contrast to Sophie's empty box. Thomas and Emily, Lisa's other siblings, shifted uncomfortably on the plush sofa, avoiding eye contact with everyone in the room. They too had children who were clearly favored by Charles and Evelyn, though neither had ever confronted their parents about this blatant inequality. David knelt beside Sophie, whose small shoulders had begun to slump. "Hey, pumpkin," he whispered, just loud enough for Lisa to hear. "Sometimes the best gifts can't be wrapped in boxes." He shot a pointed look toward Charles and Evelyn, who were now discussing the stock market with Thomas as if nothing had happened, as if Sophie's disappointment was irrelevant. Lisa felt something shift inside her, a lifetime of suppressed anger crystallizing into resolve. This would be the last time her daughter would be made to feel less than worthy by the Blackwoods. The Thanksgiving dinner that followed was an exercise in strained politeness, with conversations carefully navigating around the incident. Emily talked about her recent vacation to the Maldives, while Thomas boasted about his son's acceptance into an elite private school. Charles dominated the conversation, as usual, holding court with stories of business triumphs and social connections, periodically checking his phone for important messages. Evelyn occasionally interjected with comments about their country club friends or the latest charity gala she was organizing, her diamond earrings catching the light with every practiced tilt of her head. Lisa watched as Sophie pushed food around her plate, seated at the far end of the table where the children had been relegated. Unlike her cousins, who had been given special presents at their place settings, small designer wallets, gift cards to expensive stores, Sophie had received nothing but the empty box. David had tried to engage her in conversation, but the girl remained quiet, her usual bubbly personality dimmed. Lisa felt her heart breaking and her resolve strengthening with each passing minute. Beside her, David maintained a dignified silence, though she could see the muscle working in his jaw, a sure sign he was containing his anger. "Sophie created the most beautiful art project at school last week," Lisa said loudly, interrupting Charles's monologue about golf with a prominent senator. All eyes turned to her, some surprised at the interruption. Her teacher said it was exceptional. She has such talent. Lisa held her father's gaze, challenging him to acknowledge her daughter. Charles blinked, momentarily disoriented by the change in subject, while Evelyn's smile remained fixed, not quite reaching her eyes. How nice, Evelyn replied after an awkward pause, her tone suggesting that a child's art project was hardly worth disrupting an important conversation. Reminds me of when you used to dabble in art, Lisa, before you became practical, of course. The subtext was clear. Lisa had disappointed them by choosing a career in social work rather than joining the family investment firm like Thomas, or marrying into wealth like Rachel and Emily. David's teaching career and their modest lifestyle were constant sources of disapproval, though usually expressed through subtle digs rather than direct criticism. The tension in the room was momentarily broken when Rachel's youngest son knocked over his glass, sending water cascading across the imported tablecloth. Evelyn summoned the housekeeper with a sharp snap of her fingers, barely hiding her irritation despite the fact that this grandson, unlike Sophie, was usually doted upon. "This is why we can't have nice things around children," she muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Lisa caught David's eye across the table and saw her own thoughts reflected there. It wasn't the children Evelyn had a problem with, just their child. As dessert was served, an elaborate tiered creation from an exclusive bakery, Lisa noticed Sophie whispering something to David. Her husband nodded gravely before Sophie slipped away from the table. "She's just going to the restroom," David explained when Evelyn raised a questioning eyebrow at the breach in etiquette. Lisa watched her mother's reaction, noting the flicker of dismissal that crossed her features before she turned back to complimenting Emily on her new diamond bracelet, a gift from her investment banker husband. While the adults lingered over coffee, with Charles beginning another story about his influence in local politics, Lisa excused herself to check on Sophie. She found her daughter in the guest bedroom they were using for the weekend, carefully packing her small suitcase. "Sweetie, what are you doing?" Lisa asked, closing the door behind her. Sophie looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but determined. "I want to go home, Mom," she said simply. "Grandma and Grandpa don't like me, and I don't want to stay where I'm not wanted." The maturity and dignity in her young voice made Lisa's chest tighten with both pride and sorrow. Lisa sat beside Sophie on the bed, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace. "I'm so sorry about today," she whispered into Sophie's soft hair, smelling the familiar scent of the strawberry shampoo they bought at the local supermarket, so different from the expensive salon products her mother used. "You deserve so much better." Sophie pulled back slightly, her expression serious beyond her years. "It's okay, Mom. I know you and Dad love me. That's enough." In that moment, Lisa understood that her daughter had internalized the Blackwoods' rejection, had been carrying it silently, and had somehow found the strength to transcend it. The revelation was both heartbreaking and galvanizing. David found them shortly after, closing the door quietly behind him. "Everything all right in here?" he asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. Lisa and Sophie made room for him on the bed, forming a small circle of shared understanding. "Sophie wants to go home," Lisa explained, her voice steady now, decision already made. David nodded without hesitation. "I think that's a good idea. We can leave right after we help clean up." This was typical of David, always considerate, always thinking of others even when they didn't deserve his kindness. Lisa loved him fiercely for it, even as she sometimes wished he would be less accommodating toward her family. When they returned to the dining room, the scene was unchanged, Charles dominating, Evelyn supervising the housekeeper's cleanup, Rachel and Emily laughing at something on Thomas's phone while their children played with their new gifts in the adjacent room. Only Sophie's empty box remained where she had left it, forgotten and unremarked upon. Lisa took a deep breath and cleared her throat. "We're going to head home early," she announced. A chorus of protests arose from her siblings, though not her parents, who merely looked mildly inconvenienced by the disruption to their plans. "But you're staying until Sunday," Evelyn stated, as if her word was law. "I've already planned the weekend's menus, and we have tickets for the symphony tomorrow evening." The tickets, Lisa knew, would be for everyone except Sophie, who would be left with a babysitter as had happened on previous occasions. Charles glanced up from his phone, frowning. "This is rather sudden, Lisa. Is everything all right?" His concern sounded genuine, But Lisa had learned over the years that her father's interest was usually self-serving. He disliked anything that disrupted his carefully orchestrated world. "Everything is not all right," Lisa replied, surprising herself with her calm tone. Years of suppressed frustration were finally finding their voice. Sophie received an empty box today, while every other grandchild got thoughtful, expensive gifts. "This isn't the first time you've treated her differently, and I can't allow it to continue." The room fell silent, her siblings freezing in place while her parents' expressions shifted from surprise to indignation. David stood beside Lisa, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, present but allowing her to fight her own battle. Evelyn recovered first, her society smile sliding back into place. "I'm sure there was just a mix-up with the gifts. No need to make a scene, dear." Her dismissive tone carried decades of conditioning, the implicit message that feelings should be suppressed, appearances maintained, problems swept under designer rugs. Charles nodded in agreement, already turning back to his phone as if the matter was resolved. But Lisa was done with their evasions and manipulations, done with protecting her parents from the consequences of their actions while her daughter suffered. "It wasn't a mix-up," Lisa said firmly. "Sophie has been opening empty boxes, metaphorically speaking, since the day she was born. You've never accepted David as part of this family, and you've extended that rejection to our daughter. I've made excuses for you, tried to shield Sophie from the truth, but I won't do it anymore." Rachel made a small sound of distress, while Thomas and Emily studiously examined their coffee cups. None of them had ever directly confronted their parents, too dependent on Charles and Evelyn's financial support and approval. Charles's face darkened with anger, the expression Lisa had feared throughout her childhood now causing her to stand taller rather than shrink away. "You're being ridiculous and ungrateful," he snapped. "After everything we've done for you," Lisa cut him off, something she had never dared to do before. "What exactly have you done for us? Unlike my siblings, we don't accept your money. We don't live in houses you've helped pay for or drive cars you've purchased. We've built our life on our own terms." From the corner of her eye, Lisa saw Rachel flinch, while Thomas straightened defensively in his chair. Evelyn stood abruptly, her composure slipping to reveal genuine distress. "Lisa, you're embarrassing yourself. If you've chosen a life of modest means, that's your decision. We've always supported your independence." The subtle emphasis on modest spoke volumes about what Evelyn truly thought of their lifestyle. David tensed beside Lisa, but maintained his silence, allowing her to address the years of accumulated slights and dismissals. Sophie had returned to the room, standing quietly in the doorway, watching the confrontation with solemn eyes. "You've never supported our choices," Lisa replied. "You've tolerated them at best, criticized them at worst. And now you're extending that same conditional acceptance to Sophie, making her feel less worthy than her cousins because her parents don't meet your standards of success." Lisa took a deep breath, steadying herself for what she needed to say next. "We're going home now, and until you can truly accept and respect our family, all of us, we won't be participating in these gatherings." The finality in her voice seemed to echo in the suddenly still room. Rachel stood quickly, her expression panicked. "Lisa, you can't mean that. It's just a misunderstanding about a gift." But Lisa recognized the fear behind her sister's words, fear that she might be left alone to manage their parents' demands and expectations. Thomas and Emily exchanged concerned glances, no doubt calculating how Lisa's departure would affect their own carefully calibrated relationships with Charles and Evelyn. None of them had ever challenged the established family dynamic, each finding ways to accommodate their parents' controlling nature while extracting what benefits they could. "It's not about the gift," Lisa said gently to Rachel. "It's about years of subtle rejection and judgment. It's about teaching Sophie that she should accept being treated as less than others." She turned to address all her siblings. "And it's about all of us enabling Mom and Dad's behavior by never holding them accountable." Thomas cleared his throat uncomfortably, while Emily became intensely interested in her manicure. Lisa hadn't planned this confrontation, but now that it was happening, she realized how long it had been building within her. David finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Sophie, go get your suitcase, please." The girl nodded and disappeared upstairs. Charles stood now too, his imposing figure, once so intimidating to Lisa, seeming somehow diminished. "You're overreacting," he said, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice that Lisa had rarely heard before. "If the child felt slighted, we can get her something else. There's no need for this dramatic exit." The fact that he referred to Sophie as the child rather than by her name only reinforced Lisa's resolve. "Her name is Sophie," Lisa said. "Your granddaughter. And she doesn't need more things, she needs genuine acceptance and love." Sophie returned with her small suitcase, standing close to David, who placed a protective hand on her shoulder. Evelyn looked from Sophie to Lisa, something unreadable flickering across her carefully maintained features. "You can't possibly leave now," she said, but it sounded more like a question than a command. "What will people think? We have the neighborhood brunch tomorrow." Lisa smiled sadly at her mother's predictable concern for appearances. "That's always been the most important thing to you, hasn't it? What others think." She took Sophie's free hand, feeling her daughter's small fingers curl trustingly around her own. "We're going to focus on what's really important, making sure Sophie grows up knowing her worth isn't determined by her grandparents' approval or by material possessions." David had already gathered their coats, moving with the quiet efficiency that had always made him a steadying presence in Lisa's life. As they prepared to leave, Rachel made one last attempt to smooth things over. "Let's all calm down and discuss this rationally," she pleaded, casting anxious glances at their parents. "The holidays are about family." Lisa looked at her sister with newfound clarity, recognizing the fear of disruption that had always governed Rachel's interactions with their parents. "Yes, they are," Lisa agreed, "which is why we need to establish healthier boundaries. You're all welcome to visit us anytime, but we won't be returning here until things change." She included Thomas and Emily in her gaze, silently inviting them to consider their own complicity in the family dynamic. The drive home was quiet, the car filled with a mixture of emotional exhaustion and strange relief. Sophie had fallen asleep in the back seat, emotionally drained from the day's events. "Are you okay?" David asked softly, reaching across to squeeze Lisa's hand as they navigated the dark highway back to their modest suburban home. Lisa considered the question carefully, examining the tumult of feelings within her. "I think I will be," she answered honestly. "I should have done this years ago, but I was afraid of losing my family." David glanced at her with understanding. "Sometimes you have to risk losing something to have any chance of saving it." The weeks that followed were strange and difficult. Lisa's phone remained silent, no calls from her parents or siblings, not even during the Christmas season when family gatherings had always been mandatory. David worried about her, watching as she checked her messages with diminishing hope, but Lisa assured him she had expected this response. "They're waiting for me to cave first," she explained one evening as they decorated their small Christmas tree, making sure each of Sophie's handmade ornaments had a prominent place. "It's how they maintain control." Sophie seemed to flourish in the aftermath of Thanksgiving, as if unburdened from the weight of her grandparents' judgment, throwing herself into holiday preparations with renewed enthusiasm. January brought heavy snow and unexpected news. Thomas called late one evening, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "It's Mom and Dad," he said without preamble. "They're struggling." Lisa sat down, prepared for news of illness, not what came next. "They fired their housekeeper after an argument, and now they can't find anyone willing to work for them. Dad tried to manage their investments alone, but he made some mistakes. And they've realized that none of us has been handling their social calendar since you left." The revelation that Lisa had been unconsciously managing so much of her parents' lives came as a surprise, as did the fact that her siblings had apparently followed her lead in withdrawing their support. "Are they asking for help?" Lisa asked carefully, not wanting to be drawn back into old patterns. Thomas's laugh was hollow. "You know they'd never ask directly." But Emily went to drop off some documents and found the house in disarray. Mom looked lost. He paused, and Lisa could hear the conflict in his voice. "We've all been talking, Rachel, Emily, and me. We realized how much we've enabled their behavior, how much we've participated in their favoritism because it benefited our kids. Watching you stand up to them, it made us think." The admission was clearly difficult for Thomas, who had always aligned himself with their parents' values. Lisa considered her response carefully, refusing to rush back into the caretaking role she had unconsciously filled for years. "They need to acknowledge what they've done," she said finally. "Not just to Sophie, but to David, to me, to all of us in different ways. Real change, not just temporary compliance to get things back to normal." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "I think they might be ready," he said eventually. "They're different, humbled, maybe." He hesitated before adding, Sophie's birthday is next month. They asked if they could come. Sophie's 11th birthday party was deliberately simple, a gathering at their home with her school friends, balloons, and homemade cake, games in the backyard despite the February chill. Lisa had agreed to invite her parents, but had managed her expectations carefully, preparing Sophie for the possibility they might not come or might not have changed. When the doorbell rang an hour into the party, Lisa opened it to find Charles and Evelyn standing awkwardly on the porch, looking oddly diminished without their usual trappings of wealth and status. Evelyn's hair was styled simply, her jewelry understated, while Charles had foregone his custom suit for a more casual sweater and slacks. "We weren't sure if the invitation was still open," Evelyn said, her voice lacking its usual confidence. Lisa studied her parents, noting the genuine uncertainty in their expressions, something she had never seen before. "It is," she replied, stepping back to allow them entry into the home they had always subtly criticized. Charles carried a modestly wrapped package, holding it with unusual care. They moved tentatively into the living room, taking in the cheerful chaos of the children's party with expressions that shifted between discomfort and curiosity. David spotted them first, his eyebrows rising in surprise before he composed himself and approached, offering a handshake to Charles and a brief nod to Evelyn. "Glad you could make it," he said with remarkable graciousness, given their history. "Sophie's in the kitchen with her friends. They're decorating cookies." He glanced at Lisa, silently asking if she was okay, and she gave him a small smile of reassurance. This was a necessary step, however uncomfortable, if there was any hope of healing the family fractures. Rachel, Thomas, and Emily had arrived earlier with their children, and were watching the interaction with barely concealed anxiety. Sophie emerged from the kitchen, flour dusting her cheeks, stopping abruptly when she saw her grandparents. Her expression was guarded, the wariness in her young eyes a testament to the hurt she had experienced. Charles cleared his throat, uncharacteristically hesitant. "Happy birthday, Sophie," he said, extending the package toward her. We hoped you might open this." The room seemed to hold its collective breath as Sophie glanced at her parents for guidance. Lisa nodded encouragingly, though her heart raced with protective concern. With cautious movements, Sophie unwrapped the gift, revealing a simple wooden box, hand-carved with intricate patterns. "It's beautiful," she said politely, though confusion lingered in her expression. Charles stepped forward, kneeling despite the obvious discomfort it caused his aging knees. "Open it, please," he requested softly. Sophie lifted the lid to reveal a collection of small items, a delicate silver charm bracelet, a handwritten letter, and several photographs Lisa had never seen before. Sophie as a baby, Sophie at school events, Sophie playing in the park. Moments Lisa hadn't realized her parents had witnessed or preserved. "We've kept these," Evelyn explained, her polished veneer cracking to reveal unexpected emotion. "But we never showed you how much we noticed you, how much she faltered, unused to expressing genuine feeling. Charles continued for her, addressing Sophie directly. "We were wrong," he said simply. "We were focused on things that don't matter, status, appearances, our own pride. We missed what was important." He gestured to the photographs. "You were important, you are important, and we'd like a chance to be better grandparents, if you'll let us." Sophie studied the contents of the box, her expression thoughtful beyond her years. The party continued around them, her friends' laughter creating a backdrop to this pivotal family moment. Finally, she looked up at her grandparents. "The empty box hurt my feelings," she said directly, with the unfiltered honesty of childhood. Charles winced visibly, while Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, another unprecedented sight. "But," Sophie continued, "Mom says people can learn and change, even grown-ups." She picked up the charm bracelet, examining it with interest. "I can give you another chance." The simplicity of her forgiveness seemed to affect Charles and Evelyn profoundly. Evelyn reached out hesitantly, as if unsure whether the gesture would be welcomed, and when Sophie allowed her to fasten the bracelet around her wrist, tears spilled onto Evelyn's carefully made-up face. "Thank you," she whispered. Charles remained kneeling, despite what must have been considerable discomfort, as if the physical humbling was part of his penance. "We won't waste this chance," he promised, his voice rough with emotion. Lisa watched the exchange with mixed feelings, hope tempered by caution, years of hurt balanced against the possibility of healing. David stood beside her, his arm slipping around her waist in silent support. "It's a start," he murmured for her ears alone. Lisa nodded, thinking of all the work that still lay ahead, the conversations that would need to happen, the patterns that would need to change. But watching Sophie guide her grandparents toward the kitchen to join in the cookie decorating, seeing the tentative smiles and careful interactions, she allowed herself to believe that genuine change might be possible. The months that followed brought a gradual transformation in the Blackwood family dynamics. Charles and Evelyn began visiting regularly, adapting to the Matthews' modest lifestyle with surprising willingness. There were missteps and moments of tension, old habits emerging in subtle ways, but these were now addressed openly rather than silently endured. Lisa found her voice becoming stronger, more confident in expressing boundaries and expectations. Her siblings, too, began establishing healthier relationships with their parents, inspired by Lisa's stand and encouraged by the positive changes they witnessed. One warm evening in early summer, Lisa sat on the back porch watching as Charles helped Sophie build a birdhouse in the yard, his expensive watch set aside, his sleeves rolled up against the heat. Evelyn emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of lemonade, having insisted on making it herself rather than bringing store-bought as she would have in the past. "I never thought I'd see this day," Lisa remarked as her mother settled beside her. Evelyn followed her gaze to where Charles was laughing at something Sophie had said, his usual corporate demeanor replaced by genuine grandfatherly warmth. "Neither did I," Evelyn admitted, smoothing her linen pants with a habitual gesture. "Your father and I, we lost sight of what matters. Success, status, appearances, we thought those things would bring fulfillment." She paused, choosing her words with care. "When you cut us off, when all of you stepped back, we realized how empty our lives had become, how dependent we were on the relationships we'd been damaging." The admission clearly cost her pride, but the fact that she made it at all represented significant growth. "I'm sorry it took so long," she added softly, "and that Sophie had to be hurt before we understood." Lisa considered her mother's words, remembering the years of subtle criticism and exclusion. "I'm sorry too," she said finally. "Sorry I didn't stand up sooner. Sorry I enabled behaviors that were harmful to my daughter and my marriage." David emerged from the house, catching the tail end of their conversation. He placed a gentle hand on Lisa's shoulder before joining Charles and Sophie in the yard, his acceptance of her parents' presence in their lives a testament to his generous spirit. "He's a good man," Evelyn observed, watching as David patiently helped Sophie align two pieces of wood. "We should have seen that from the beginning." In the gathering twilight, as fireflies began to appear in the garden, Lisa reflected on the journey their family had undertaken. The empty gift box that had catalyzed their confrontation had led, ironically, to the fullest version of family they had ever experienced, one based on authentic connection rather than obligation, on mutual respect rather than power dynamics. Sophie's capacity for forgiveness had opened the door, but it was the collective willingness to walk through it, to do the difficult work of rebuilding trust, that had allowed them to create something new and valuable from the broken pieces of the past. Charles called out to them, proudly displaying the completed birdhouse as Sophie beamed beside him. "Come see what we've made," he invited, his voice carrying the genuine enthusiasm of someone who had discovered joy in simple accomplishments. Lisa exchanged a smile with her mother before they rose to join the others, stepping from the porch into the garden where the future of their family was being rebuilt, one small moment of connection at a time. Thank you for listening to this story. If you like it, please do not forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next story of Narrative Whispers.